Stephen walked out of the office earlier than usual, the weight of the day's work still heavy on his shoulders. The project deadline had been moved up, and he had spent the last week putting in extra hours. Today, however, he managed to wrap up his tasks by mid-afternoon. As he stepped into the warm summer air, he decided to surprise Linda by picking up her favorite takeout from the little Italian place downtown. Driving to the restaurant, Stephen thought about how they hadn't spent much quality time together lately. He felt a pang of guilt, realizing how much he had neglected their relationship. "I'll make it up to her tonight," he promised himself, imagining her delighted smile when he walked through the door with dinner in hand. As he turned onto their quiet suburban street, he noticed a sleek black car parked near their driveway. It seemed out of place in their neighborhood. Stephen's brow furrowed, a subtle unease creeping into his mind. He shook off the feeling, telling himself it was probably just a visitor for one of the neighbors. Parking his car a few houses down to avoid suspicion, Stephen grabbed the takeout bag and walked towards his house. As he got closer, he heard moaning voices and laughter. His heart began to race, a cold dread settling in his stomach. He quickened his pace, his footsteps silent on the pavement. Stephen crept closer to the black car, his breath hitching as he recognized Linda's laughter. The sound was carefree and intimate, a tone she hadn't used with him in months. The world seemed to slow down as he peered through the tinted window. There she was, wrapped around another man, their bodies entangled in a way that made his stomach churn. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the pain of betrayal. The sight of Linda, her head thrown back in pleasure, was like a knife to his gut. Stephen's vision blurred with tears of rage and heartbreak. "What the fuck, Linda?" Stephen's voice cut through the night, filled with a mix of fury and despair. Linda jerked back, her eyes wide with shock before hardening into a defiant glare. "Oh gosh, shut up, Stephen," she spat, not even bothering to cover herself. "I love to serve this Big Johnson. It's better than yours." Stephen's hands trembled as he clenched them into fists. "You're disgusting, Linda," he said, his voice barely controlled. "I thought we had something worth saving." Her lover, a muscular man with a smug grin, looked Stephen up and down dismissively. "Get lost, loser," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "She'll satisfy me and then get back." Stephen took a step forward, his rage boiling over. "You think you can just take my wife and talk to me like that?" Linda laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Maybe if you were half the man he is, we wouldn't be in this mess." Stephen's fists tightened, his knuckles white. "How long has this been going on, Linda? How long have you been betraying me?" Linda shrugged, her indifference like salt in the wound. "Does it matter? We're done, Stephen. I'm happier with him than I ever was with you." Before Stephen could respond, the lover's bodyguards, who had been standing near the car, lunged at him. The first one swung a punch, but Stephen, driven by a mix of adrenaline and anger, moved swiftly. He sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it until he heard a sickening crack. The bodyguard cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground. The second bodyguard hesitated, giving Stephen just enough time to land a powerful punch to his jaw. The impact sent the man sprawling, his head hitting the pavement with a dull thud. The sound of the impact echoed in the still night, leaving Linda and her lover staring in stunned silence. Stephen stood over the unconscious bodyguards, his chest heaving with exertion. He turned his attention back to Linda and her lover, his eyes blazing with fury. "Get out of the car," he demanded, his voice cold and commanding. Linda hesitated, but her lover pushed her forward. "Do as he says," he muttered, his confidence faltering. Linda stumbled out of the car, wrapping her arms around herself. Stephen took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "How long, Linda?" he asked again, his voice a dangerous whisper. "Does it matter?" she shot back, but the defiance in her voice was waning. "It matters to me, bitch," Stephen replied, his voice breaking. "We could have worked things out. We could have fixed this." Linda's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of regret crossing her face. "I was lonely, Stephen. You were always working. He made me feel alive again." Stephen took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside him. You could have talked to me, Linda. We could have found a way. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. The aftermath of the fight left an eerie silence in the air. The bodyguards lay on the ground, groaning in pain, while Stephen's chest heaved with the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The lover's bravado crumbled as he watched his hired muscle fall. He took a step back, his confidence faltering. His eyes darted from Stephen to Linda, searching for an escape. Is she coming with me, or what? He demanded, his voice lacking its previous conviction. His hand twitched nervously at his side. Stephen stepped closer, his presence menacing and unyielding. No, she's staying here to pack her things. And as for you, if I ever see you near her or my house again, you'll regret it. The lover sneered, attempting to regain some semblance of control. You think you can scare me? Do you know who I am? Stephen's eyes were cold, like steel. I don't care who you are. Try me, and you'll find out just how far I'm willing to go. The lover hesitated, his resolve crumbling under Stephen's intense gaze. With one last look at Linda, who avoided his eyes, he turned and walked away, his steps quickening as he distanced himself from the confrontation. Stephen watched him go, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. The sound of the car engine starting and driving off was a small victory, but it did nothing to heal the wound in his heart. Stephen looked at Linda, the woman he had loved and trusted, and felt a wave of sadness wash over him. Go inside, he said quietly. We need to talk, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Stephen's grip on Linda's arm was firm, but not harsh as he led her back to the house. The walk was silent, the cold night air filled with unspoken accusations. Each step felt like a mile, the tension between them palpable. The rhythmic crunch of their footsteps on the gravel seemed deafening in the stillness of the night. Stephen's mind raced, a storm of emotions swirling within him. The betrayal, the humiliation, the anger. All of it churned in his gut, threatening to spill over. He glanced at Linda, her face a mask of defiance and something else. Regret? Guilt? He couldn't be sure. The woman walking beside him seemed like a stranger. As they reached the front door, Stephen paused, his hand hovering over the handle. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it, the moment of truth. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the hinges sounding louder than ever. The living room was a museum of their life together. Photos of happier times adorned the walls, a stark reminder of the love they once shared. The wedding picture on the mantel, the framed photo of their first vacation, the snapshots of birthdays and anniversaries. All these mementos now felt like cruel taunts. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Stephen's eyes scanned the space, taking in the worn sofa, the coffee table cluttered with magazines, the vase of wilting flowers on the side table. Every object felt heavy with the weight of their history. Linda stood by the door, her arms crossed defensively. Stephen could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. What do you want, Stephen? Linda asked, her voice breaking as she shoved clothes into a suitcase. Why are you making this harder than it already is? I want to know why, Stephen replied, his voice a mix of anger and sadness. Why did you do this to us? To our marriage? Linda sat down on the edge of the sofa, her shoulders slumped, defeated. I was lonely, Stephen. You were always working. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. Stephen's eyes scanned the room, landing on the photos of their life together. We could have talked about it, he said, his voice softer now. We could have found a way to make it work. But you didn't give us that chance. Linda looked up, her eyes filled with regret. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. Every time I tried, it felt like you weren't really there. Stephen took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. Fine. If that's how you feel, then we're done. Linda's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean? I mean, pack your things and get out, Stephen said, his voice firm. We're getting a divorce. I can't live like this, knowing what you've done. Linda stared at him, her defiance melting into disbelief. You can't be serious, Stephen. We've been together for so long. You can't just throw it all away. Stephen's eyes hardened, I'm not the one who threw it away, Linda. You did that the moment you decided to cheat. And you can tell your lover out there that he won't get away with this. I'll make sure of it. Linda stood, her hands trembling. Stephen, please, let's talk about this. We can work it out. I made a mistake, but we can fix it. Stephen shook his head, his resolve unyielding. No, Linda. Some things can't be fixed. And this is one of them. Now pack your things and leave. The living room, once filled with warmth and love, now felt cold and distant. The walls were adorned with photos of their life together, their wedding day, vacations, holidays, all moments that now felt like a cruel mockery of the present. The sofa where they had spent countless evenings together now served as a staging ground for Linda's departure. Stephen's gaze lingered on a photo of them at the beach, smiling and carefree. The contrast between that memory and the current reality was almost too much to bear. He turned away, focusing on the task at hand. Linda moved slowly, her hands shaking as she packed her bags. The clatter of hangers and the rustling of clothes filled the silence, each sound a reminder of the life they had built together and the betrayal that had shattered it. Stephen walked over to the fireplace, picking up the photo from their wedding day. He studied it for a moment, tracing the lines of their happy faces with his thumb. I loved you, Linda, he said quietly, his voice filled with pain. I gave you everything I had, and you threw it all away. Linda stopped packing, her head bowed. I know, Stephen. I know I messed up. I'm so sorry. Stephen placed the photo back on the mantel, his decision resolute. Sorry isn't enough this time. I deserve better than this. We both do. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll go, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you like this. I was just lost. Stephen's eyes softened for a moment, but the hurt quickly resurfaced. We were supposed to be a team, Linda. We were supposed to face everything together. But you gave up on us. Linda zipped up her suitcase and stood, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Stephen watched as she walked towards the door, her steps heavy with the weight of their broken marriage. He followed her, opening the door and holding it open as she stepped out into the cold night air. Goodbye, Linda, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Linda turned to look at him one last time, her eyes filled with sorrow. Goodbye, Stephen. I hope you find happiness. With that, she walked down the steps and into the night, leaving Stephen standing in the doorway, his heart aching with a mix of relief and sorrow. The sound of her suitcase wheels rolling on the pavement faded into the distance, and Stephen closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of the evening finally settled over him. He took a deep breath, the reality of his new life sinking in. The house felt emptier, the silence louder. But for the first time in a long time, Stephen felt a glimmer of hope. He would heal, he would move on, and he would find happiness again. But for now, he allowed himself to grieve, to feel the pain, and to begin the long journey of healing. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions for Stephen. He woke up each morning in an empty house, the silence a stark contrast to the life he once knew. The betrayal weighed heavily on him, gnawing at his heart and mind. To cope, he buried himself in work, staying late at the office and taking on extra projects. His colleagues noticed his newfound intensity, but no one dared to ask why. Stephen's evenings were spent with friends who rallied around him, offering support and a much-needed distraction. They would drag him to the local bar, trying to bring some laughter back into his life. Despite their best efforts, Stephen's thoughts often drifted back to Linda and the life they had built together. He found solace in their company, yet the void inside him remained. One night, as Stephen sat on his porch, nursing a beer and staring into the darkness, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Linda. I'm sorry, it read. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I regret everything. Stephen stared at the message for a long time, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and pity. He finally replied, I appreciate the apology, Linda. I hope you find peace. As he hit send, he felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. He knew he couldn't go back to what they had, but perhaps this was the first step towards moving forward. Linda found herself in a small, dingy apartment on the other side of town. Her lover had lost interest once the thrill of the affair was gone, leaving her to grapple with the consequences of her actions. She spent her days in a haze, filled with regret and loneliness. The apartment was a far cry from the home she had shared with Stephen, and every corner reminded her of what she had lost. She tried reaching out to Stephen several times, sending messages and leaving voicemails, but his responses were always polite yet distant. "I'm sorry for what I did," she wrote one night, her fingers trembling. "I wish I could take it back." Stephen's reply was brief and to the point. "What's done is done, Linda. We both need to move on." Linda stared at the message, tears streaming down her face. She knew he was right, but the reality of her situation was hard to bear. She had traded a life of stability and love for a fleeting moment of excitement, and now she was paying the price. Determined to make amends, Linda sought therapy, hoping to understand why she had made such destructive choices. Her therapist, a kind woman in her 50s, listened patiently as Linda poured out her heart. "You need to forgive yourself first," the therapist said gently. "Only then can you start to heal and move forward." Linda nodded, wiping away her tears. She knew it would be a long journey, but she was determined to find a way to make things right, even if it was just within herself. Stephen found himself leaning more on his friends and family, who provided a steady source of support. One evening, his best friend, Brian, invited him over for dinner. As they sat on the porch, sipping whiskey, Brian turned to Stephen. "How are you holding up, man?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Stephen shrugged, staring into his glass. "Some days are better than others," he admitted. "I just can't believe she did this to us. I thought we had something real." Brian nodded, placing a hand on Stephen's shoulder. "You did, and that's why it hurts so much. But you'll get through this. You're stronger than you think." Stephen sighed, the weight of his friend's words sinking in. "I hope you're right. It just feels like everything I knew is gone." As the night went on, they reminisced about old times, laughing and sharing stories. It was a welcome distraction from the pain, and for a few hours, Stephen felt a glimmer of hope. His family, too, played a crucial role in his healing process. His sister, Sarah, called him every day, checking in and offering words of encouragement. "You need to take care of yourself, Stephen," she would say. "Don't let this destroy you." Stephen appreciated her concern, but he struggled to heed her advice. The nights were the hardest, filled with memories of Linda and the life they had shared. He often found himself lying awake, replaying the events of the past few weeks over and over in his mind. Despite the emotional turmoil, Stephen slowly began to rebuild his life. He focused on his work, finding satisfaction in the small victories that each day brought. His friends continued to be a source of strength, and he leaned on them more than ever before. One weekend, Brian suggested they go on a hiking trip, something they hadn't done in years. "It'll be good for you," Brian insisted. "Get out of the city, clear your head." Stephen agreed, and they spent the weekend in the mountains, surrounded by nature's tranquility. The fresh air and physical exertion were a welcome change, and Stephen found himself feeling lighter, more hopeful. As they sat around the campfire on the last night of their trip, Brian turned to Stephen. "You know, this could be a new beginning for you. A chance to start fresh." Stephen stared into the flames, contemplating his friend's words. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Maybe it is." Back in the city, Stephen took small steps towards reclaiming his happiness. He joined a gym, started cooking more, and even signed up for a photography class, something he had always wanted to do but never found the time for. His interactions with Linda became less frequent, their conversations limited to necessary discussions about the divorce. Each message from her was a reminder of the past, but Stephen tried to focus on the future. He knew it would take time, but he was determined to find his way back to himself. Months passed, and slowly but surely, Stephen began to feel like himself again. He still carried the scars of Linda's betrayal, but they no longer defined him. He had built a new life, one filled with new experiences and the unwavering support of his friends and family. One day, as he was walking through the park, he received a final message from Linda. "I've started to forgive myself," it read. "I hope one day you can forgive me too." Stephen paused, looking around at the vibrant life unfolding around him. He took a deep breath and replied, "I already have. I wish you well, Linda." As he sent the message, he felt a sense of closure. The chapter of his life with Linda was over, but a new one was just beginning. With a renewed sense of purpose, Stephen walked on, ready to embrace whatever the future held. In the aftermath of the chaos, Stephen embarked on a journey of healing and self-discovery. The first step was reclaiming his space. He repainted the walls, changed the furniture layout, and filled the house with new decorations that reflected his personality and tastes. The transformation was therapeutic, marking a fresh start. Stephen also rediscovered old hobbies that had fallen by the wayside during his marriage. He dusted off his hiking boots and ventured into the nearby trails, finding solace in nature. Each hike was a reminder of the world's beauty and his own resilience. He took up painting again, something he had loved in college but abandoned as life got busier. The vibrant colors and creative process were a balm to his wounded soul. In addition to his solo pursuits, Stephen sought to expand his social circle. He joined a local photography class, eager to learn a new skill and meet people with similar interests. The class met every Thursday evening, and it quickly became the highlight of his week. He bonded with his classmates over their shared passion, and they often went on weekend photo shoots together. Through these activities, Stephen forged new friendships and reconnected with old ones. Brian, his best friend, remained a constant source of support, but Stephen also made an effort to reach out to other friends he had lost touch with over the years. He hosted dinner parties, went out for drinks, and even attended a few community events. The warmth and camaraderie of these interactions were a stark contrast to the isolation he had felt during the turbulent months of his divorce. Amid his efforts to move forward, Stephen received occasional messages from Linda. Her tone was always remorseful, filled with apologies and regrets. Each message tugged at his heartstrings, but Stephen knew that reopening that chapter would only bring more pain. Instead, he chose to focus on his own healing. One evening, as Stephen was painting a sunset from his latest hike, his phone buzzed with another message from Linda. "I'm sorry for everything, Stephen. I hope you can forgive me someday." Stephen put down his brush and stared at the message. He took a deep breath and replied, "Thank you, Linda. I appreciate your apology. I hope you find peace." As he sent the message, he felt a sense of closure. He had acknowledged her remorse, but had not allowed it to derail his progress. It was a moment of clarity and strength, affirming his decision to prioritize his well-being. Linda's final attempt at reconciliation came a few weeks later when she called him. The conversation was brief but heartfelt. "Stephen, I just wanted to hear your voice one last time and say that I'm truly sorry. I hope you have a wonderful life." "Thank you, Linda," Stephen replied. "I wish you the best as well." With that, the chapter of his life with Linda came to a close. He felt a mix of emotions, sadness for what was lost, but also relief and hope for the future. As the months turned into a year, Stephen's life continued to blossom. His photography skills improved, and he even had a few of his photos displayed in a local gallery. The sense of accomplishment was invigorating, a testament to his hard work and dedication. His social life flourished as well. He became close with several members of his photography class, and they formed a tight-knit group that regularly went on adventures together. They explored new hiking trails, attended art exhibits, and shared countless meals and laughter. These friendships were a source of joy and inspiration, helping Stephen see the world through a new lens. One of his new friends, Emily, had a particularly profound impact on him. She was a fellow photographer, with a keen eye for detail and a passion for capturing the essence of life. They spent hours discussing their art, and over time, their bond deepened into something more. Stephen was hesitant at first, afraid of getting hurt again, but Emily's kindness and understanding gradually melted his fears. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat by a bonfire during a group camping trip, Stephen took Emily's hand. "Thank you for being here," he said softly. "You've helped me find joy again." Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You've done the same for me, Stephen. I'm glad we found each other." As the night sky stretched above them, filled with stars, Stephen felt a profound sense of peace. The past was behind him, and the future was full of promise. He had faced the worst and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever came next. Stephen's journey of healing was not linear, but each step brought him closer to a place of peace and fulfillment. He continued to explore new hobbies, nurture his friendships, and deepen his relationship with Emily. His home, once a place of sorrow, was now filled with laughter and love. He often thought back to the tumultuous period after his divorce, recognizing how far he had come. The pain of betrayal had been overwhelming, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. Stephen had discovered his own strength, resilience, and capacity for joy. As he looked to the future, Stephen felt a sense of excitement and optimism. He had learned to cherish the present moment, to find beauty in everyday experiences, and to build a life that reflected his true self. The scars of the past would always be there, but they were now a part of a much larger and more vibrant tapestry. With Emily by his side and a supportive network of friends, Stephen was ready to face whatever challenges and adventures lay ahead. The road to healing had been long and arduous, but it had led him to a place of peace and happiness. And for that, he was deeply grateful.